So thank you all so much for joining us today. I do say this week after week, but there is just so much going on in the market right now. And I've had quite a few conversations with shippers, with also manufacturers in general, also other partner 3PLs that we work with, just kind of focused on, hey, what do we think about the next 6 to 8 months? And we all have agreed, I kind of brought it up, but we've all agreed that like a crystal ball right now, if we kind of took a view back over the whole pandemic right now, we all really wish we had a crystal ball because there's a lot of different directions that are going on. There's a lot of multi-dimensional chess going on as well. And it's just hard to cut through and get to the point. But besides the point, if this is your first time joining us, this is our Freight Market Roundup. Welcome. Our goal here is to give you a snapshot of the price averages we've been experiencing across all of our major shipping lanes. That includes air freight, but also breaks down some of the current events that are affecting us in the shipping markets, but also our customers at large or the business community in general, and some of the risks they might deal with when shipping out of a region or shipping into an area or something along those lines. My name is Jason Brand. I'm the Director of Outreach and Partner Development here at Supply Chain Solutions, and I am joined every week by our amazing Director of Marketing, Vanessa Fry. And I promise you, this show would not be possible without her. Trust me, I mean, she was out for a week, and Anthony and I were trying to get the show to work. Everything went wrong, and then my internet died. I kind of wish we could send the link out to everyone as a little bit of humor because it was hilarious. We made it through. It was a very good episode, but wow, it was tough. So just to get anyone up to speed who's just joining for the first time, give you a quick overview of our agenda. I'm first going to walk through the major ocean lanes. I'm going to start with the Trans-Pacific. We'll work our way to the Transatlantic, and then we'll finish up the ocean portion talking about China to Europe. I'm going to follow up the ocean portion discussion with a discussion about air rates, and then I'll dive into fuel. There is so much going on. Unfortunately, we are going to probably have to steamroll through some of this, but there's some big things we got to talk about. The things we miss, I'll make sure that we cover in subsequent shows, because trust me, wow, just so much happening right now. So with that all being said, let's dive right into our Trans-Pacific lane. So looking at China to the US West Coast first, and remember, we're strictly looking at just the ocean portion of the shipments and our averages that we're seeing. So quick, take a step back. If you've been listening to our show over the past year, you've definitely heard us talking about these ideas of a glass ceiling and a glass floor. And the Trans-Pacific lane in particular has definitely found its glass floor. And it's really apparent when you look at our rate averages over the course of the past month. So right now, our customers are paying roughly $2,500 for the ocean portion from China to US West Coast ports, or those China to US West Coast shipments. And those rates have stayed roughly around this $2,500 level since really the beginning of October. Now, that is with the exception of a few periods where we were able to capture rates below 2,000, even below 1,500, which is just astonishingly low. But now let's kind of get a complete view of this, and let's flip over to the East Coast ports. If you're shipping out of China, you're going to be arriving instead of the West Coast, you're going to be coming around, going into the East Coast or Gulf ports as well. So in comparison, the East Coast has been seeing a substantial amount of volume shift from the West Coast, and the ports themselves, they're just not equipped to handle these disproportionate amounts of cargo. So, you know, and what you actually see is if you look at our rate trends over the same period, you compare the two, you see this reflected in that as well, which is kind of cool. So back in September, if you're shipping from China to the East Coast, your rate was roughly $8,000. Now we are seeing rates sitting at about $5,500. Now, rates didn't free fall in the way they did on the West Coast. And really, we have just started seeing it settle into the current price range. But we could see this go a little lower over the next couple months, in my opinion. Now, while as just a general statement for the community at large right now, each lane and each side of each lane is experiencing their own challenges in this post-pandemic shipping market. But I think it's important to note that the Trans-Pacific lane in particular is in a very unstable position at the moment compared to the other lanes. So a lot of things are going on, but really to start off with a few of the most important things you need updates on. Let's first talk about the ILWU. And as a reminder, that stands for the International Longshore and Warehouse Union. and the PMA, and that stands for the Pacific Maritime Association, and they're going through their labor negotiations. So if you're still shipping into the West Coast, you probably heard about the shutdown that happened on Monday of this week. Now, I did mention this in a little detail in the last freight market update, but essentially the contract negotiations have sort of switched over the past 6 months, and they've turned into a little bit of a turf war. And it's not between the ILWU and the PMA, it's actually between two parallel unions and who has the rights for what jobs over the course of this future contract and beyond. So what happened on Monday is essentially, if you haven't heard, the ILWU did something called red tagging equipment, and they did this throughout a majority of the equipment in the Oakland terminal early on Monday. It essentially means nothing can be used until it is checked by a mechanic. It takes a substantial amount of time. In some cases, ships had to be literally unloaded and then reloaded. So a total waste. And yeah, but even though this was pretty, this is really what we didn't want to see. This was definitely the lower points of the negotiation so far, but it did have a really, really positive effect, actually a fantastic silver lining. And this is that these two parallel unions, the ones fighting over the turf war, it's the ILWU and another group called the AIM, that stands for the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. Their director, the AIM's director, Don Crosado, he announced just this week following the shutdowns that, AIM, or AIM, excuse me, not AIM, AIM, would not stand in the way of the ILWU being used for labor at this T5 terminal. This has been really the hot button issue. And they're going to basically step out, and they're going to wait for another body, which is called the National Labor Relations Board. I'm going to kill myself with all these tongue twisters. And their judgment on who gets what work will happen actually next spring. So they're literally taking a step back. They're saying, hey, you guys can have the work and just work on your contract. It was actually a really cool statement where it was essentially AIM saying it's extremely important that they come to an agreement. And if we are standing in the way, we are going to step out of this. Really cool. Now, if they don't come to an agreement by spring, well, it will just be a very bad situation. But yeah, anyway, we can get into that in early Q1. So over the tensions of the last 6 months, particularly on the West Coast, and this is obviously these terminal labor contracts, and not to mention the AB5 legislation, which we talked about in an earlier show involving California trucking and independent contractors. So ocean vessels have been responding to this, and obviously shippers have been making their response as well. But for ocean vessels, ocean vessel carriers, they have been removing capacity, and they've been removing it from the Trans-Pacific lane at truly an alarming rate. So just the past couple of weeks, we saw more than 50 new blank sailings announced between now and the end of the year. And that's a substantial amount. But also, this is kind of the surprising thing. Even though there's 50 blank sailings, it's unlikely to affect rates. It's unlikely to kind of hold them up at this point. And that is, that's kind of a double-pronged situation, because they're also dealing with, we had the freight peaks last year, and all of these ocean liners bought a bunch of ships, and now they're coming into service. And I'll get into that in a moment. But, two of the largest ocean carriers are MSC and Maersk. You've probably heard of both of them. But what you may not have heard about those two carriers is that they formed the TWIM Alliance. And what's fascinating is that MSC specifically has been ordering so many ships over the past couple of years with all the freight peaks and such. It was just determined that MSC alone is about as large as the entire fleet of MSC plus Maersk back when they originally signed the alliance, the TWIM Alliance. This happened back in 2015. So huge growth that MSC has been seeing due to all of these new ships ordered. They also were reported as having currently the largest order book. So they're big and they're growing. Now, what's kind of cool about this, a lot of people are thinking, okay, they're going to make a move to split from the TWIM Alliance and become a standalone carrier. If that happens, that is a really good situation for us, because, Anthony and I have joked about this quite a lot, but, we've got the ocean liner, the ocean carrier cartels that we speak to them as. And, there's a lot of just price setting that just occurs across this whole situation. And, you know, if we can get more players in the game, it's good for all of us. If we can break up some of these alliances, it's good for all of us. They're in a weird legal area, just based on how they operate. So it's always kind of hard to pin them down and really get proof. We saw this during the pandemic when subpoenas were getting sent and it just really wasn't resulting in anything. And the whole demerge and detention situation, which has some updates, but we're gonna have to talk about that later. But point is that there's a lot of ships coming into this market that is a market that's really quite flat, or actually on the decline in comparison to how it has been. Now, let me move on a little bit. So I want to leave the Trans-Pacific. There is a ton going on. We could talk about it all day. I want to move over to the Transatlantic. But before I do so, I want to take a look at the numbers. I want to talk about what does port congestion look like today. So I personally went on, I counted all of the ships at some of the major ports that we use and a lot of other people use. So let's start with Long Beach and LA. They're sitting with 6 ships waiting to berth right now. And that's the same for Oakland, just 6 ships. Now, if we travel to the Gulf, you'll see congestion starts to rise. Houston's got 21 ships waiting to berth. And then if you head over to Savannah, you've got over 34 ships waiting to berth. And then Norfolk's got over 28, but it's a rough 28 because just the way their ships berth, some are moving, some aren't moving, but they're still berthing in theory. So it gets a little kind of complicated to make that count accurate. Now, let's think about this. Let's remember that West Coast ports, they've got a substantially greater throughput than East Coast ports. So when you're kind of considering, oh, you know, if they had, you know, 6 compared to 21, that 21 is equivalent to, you know, the other side of the country, the West Coast ports having not 21, but substantially more. So just kind of consider that in your calculations. The numbers that we're seeing on the East Coast are too high, quite frankly. But let's talk about those transatlantic lanes. So remember, we're just going to talk about the ocean rate averages that we are seeing, but looking at shipments leaving Europe, heading into the US East Coast, we are actually seeing currently a slump in rates, even despite some of this congestion. Now, our averages came in at actually the lowest in months that we've seen. Right now, they're landing at around 6,400. And, you know, rates on this lane in the last week of August were still over 8,500. And they were actually at 8,500, near the highest this lane has ever been. But, you know, in the past 2 months, we've seen them fluttering around 7,500. And this is, you know, where this lane is headed in the next 3 months is likely going to be continuing heading downward. Now, the reason why we're expecting that is we should be seeing some resolution on the ILWU contract negotiation, and that should be happening at the very latest December, January. You know, when that happens, the cargo shift will start to move back to the West Coast. That'll take care of some of this excess congestion. And, you know, that'll help with the throughput of the ports, and that when the throughputs goes down, that's just good for everyone in general. So, yeah. But as a quick note, before I dive into some of the things to keep in mind, we did just form a partnership and we are doing weekly consolidation shipments out of Germany. Generally speaking, we would have to go through other consolidation programs, but now this is our very own. It's with our very own partner. They own the containers. And as a result, we do have an incredible service we can offer. And we also have incredible rates we can offer. So if you are importing from Europe less than a container a month, so a container a month or less, you should really take a look at this program and see maybe if it's a better fit for you, because it's extremely competitive. We've had some great results so far with it. Now, let's get back to the rate over the next 3 months and what to expect on this Europe to US. So, and actually across the board with this point, we do have the IMO initiatives, and they're coming up. This happens yearly. There's kind of this new push. This is obviously going to be the IMO 2023 ones. So these are environmental regulations. They're imposed by the International Maritime Organization, IMO. And generally, this causes some rate drama over the first few months. And but, you know, the thing is with this year, there is already low demand, and there's going to be definitely low demand in Q1. So we are not expecting actually much effect. And I've corroborated this with a lot of different other 3PLs and also with other articles and industry analysts as well. We're really not expecting rates or your company's wallets to get hit by this very hard this year. So little piece of good news in kind of a bad news storm. Now, back to kind of bad news. So for the U.S. intermodal shipping, we've got another one of the 12 rail unions that voted down the collective bargaining agreement. And this was with the railroads. It was reached back in September. So essentially the news this week is that the International Brotherhood of Boilermakers, they're known as the IBB, it's one of actually the smallest unions of the 12. They represent less than 0.05% of the total union membership. They are disagreeing. So what's going to happen is negotiators representing the IBB and the U.S. rail management, they're going to meet, they're going to hammer out the differences with both sides, but they do have an agreed upon cooling off period. It's going to go through December 9th. That is incredibly critical. There was an article by chemical suppliers that basically said, hey, if there is a rail strike, you have not seen problems yet. So we do have to hope that everything's going to go well. We did an awesome episode on diesel and also on rail and broke down some of the 12 unions, some of the issues. We broke down also the whole agreement. You should totally check that out. It's on YouTube, and we can also send it out to you. Just let us know and we'll send you a copy. Now, literally, there is like so much going on. We're going to have to keep moving forward just to make sure we stay on some kind of range of accurate time here today. So next, we've got our China to Europe lane. So when we're thinking about glass floors and kind of as we've talked about some of these other rate averages we're seeing, this lane has actually found a new level of low, and it's also found some price stability at that point. So we've seen this rate just gradually decline over the course of the last 3 months. And if we look back to the first week of September, we were seeing the rate around $7,800. Then if you look to the beginning of October, our rate averages were roughly around $6,300. Remember, this is the ocean portion of the shipment. And now we are seeing rates around $4,800. But what's happened with that 48 is it's really been staying put for over a month now. And it's really been very consistent. Now, I like to mention this about this lane because it is a really interesting lane and a lot of people don't know about it, but it is a complicated lane, and it's a longer lane, and it has a lot of benefits for the shippers who use it. There's more stops along the way, depending on what service or what actual lane you're using. And it is a really good barometer for the shipping industry at a whole. I love making this point. It is considered the busiest lane in the world. And so it does, for that adage to the barometer, it kind of can help people understand where is our volume of global shipping at in the world today. So good things to know. But let's move on to air. So looking at air, and when specifically thinking about air freight, air cargo out of China into the US, we have conventionally seen a very seesaw effect in rates. They'll pop up, they'll go down, they'll pop up over the course of a month. It's definitely a great reason to have a good relationship with your logistics provider to understand what's the best time to ship air versus when's the worst time to ship air. But right now, that seesaw effect is kind of settling down a bit. A little bit more price consistency, still not as much as some of our other lanes. But if we're looking back past our past few averages, it's a little lower right now. It's around $5.50 a kilo. It's a pretty good price for coming out of China. And I would say, and we talked to some of the people internally, this rate's probably going to head upwards. This is going to be due to a little bit of capacity manipulation, but other factors as well. So if you do need to ship air out of China, you should consider doing it as soon as possible. This is a pretty good rate for right now. Now, looking at European air shipments coming into the US, if you've been shipping this lane via air, you know that it's been very consistent in price. It's kind of old faithful when it comes to air cargo, which is great. There's a lot of capacity and there's a lot of movement, obviously, of passengers as well. So it's been, that also helps its price consistency. But we are seeing this rate start to trend upward just a little. For the longest time, it was right around $3 a kilo. Right now, it's around $3.25 a kilo. So keep that in mind. Looks like it's probably going to keep rising. It's just based on what we're just seeing this land, Old Faithful, slowly move upwards. So keep that in mind. Now, if you're shipping out of South America or even just Latin America in general, Caribbean as well, you are going to be seeing some great rates at this time. If you have been holding off on an air shipment, ship now for sure. Lowest rates we've actually seen for our averages, and we're really not sure how long they're going to hold for. We're seeing rates below $1.50 a kilo. So fantastic. If you got to get something in and you're coming from Central or South America, book now before you lose this rate. So let's quick move on to fuel. And I was thinking about this, and I know we've had a lot of questions about diesel. I've had a lot of questions about diesel in random places as well, just in general in life, but also on this show. And, we're not going to be able to dive into it right now in too much depth. I'll try to talk about it a little bit, But Vanessa and I really should put something on the calendar to revisit the diesel topic, because it is going to be a very interesting, evolving topic over the next 3 to 6 months. So we should kind of put a pin in a deep discussion, but we should come back to do a deep dive on this. A lot of factors, a lot of interesting things, really not all bad necessarily. So keep that in mind.
Do it.
Oh, wait, say it again.
Let's do it.
I love it. I love it. I love it. So price averages right now across the US, we're sitting at around $5.31 a gallon. This has actually been a very stable price. We've seen this for about 3 weeks. The fluctuation's been only in the pennies. Beforehand, we were seeing, literally before this whole diesel situation kind of popped up on everyone's radar, we were seeing price fluctuations of more like 20 cents. And so it's definitely stabilizing. Now, just to give you a little taste of an idea of what's happening in the diesel realm. So our inventories right now are sitting at roughly 177.4 million barrels. And that sounds like a lot, but it's actually the lowest inventory we've had since 1951 for this time period. So definitely a little lower than usual. The reasons why, though, are because there are a few different reasons, but one of the main reasons is we are still exporting oil to Europe. And this is easing their energy situation caused by the Russian-Ukraine conflict. Now, this has been said before, but I'm going to say it again. Yes, these are low inventories, but if you kind of dive into it, we're okay for now. We are okay for now. The time period that things are really going to start to get dicey is actually when these European sanctions start to hit seaborne Russian crude oil. This is going to happen in December. And then also once they're extended to petroleum products in February, that's going to be when things really tighten up. The reality of the situation, actually, I think this is a great description. One of the chief executives of the Massachusetts-based Global Partners, his name's Eric Slifka. He basically said, hey, even though inventory levels themselves may be low, the reality is the market's going to price itself into a way where we will attract barrels from anywhere and everywhere. So right now, if you actually look at the cost per barrel, it's relatively low compared to these inventory concerns. But as soon as we see the winter months really kick in, even though it's pouring snow around us right now, but as soon as we really see them kick in and some of these sanctions kick in, we'll see that cost rise. And as a result, we will start to attract more foreign oil. It is an intense environment right now, and for foreign diesel. And there has been a lot of talk about just us and Europe both kind of battling over it. The main negative takeaway here, because I know that was like a little like, hey, it's going to work itself out. The main negative takeaway is, in the end, diesel price will go up, and it's already high. And this will be another inflationary factor. So do expect diesel to affect inflation over the course of the next 3 to 6 months. Okay, that's what I got for you today. A lot, and honestly, there's areas where I had more, and I was like, I've got too much already. We'll bring it in next week, or we'll bring it in, or the following week, excuse me. But yeah, Vanessa, any questions?
I do have one. Thank you so much. That was so good, and you explained everything so well that I think people might not have too many questions. If you do have questions, send them my way or email us that question, and we can reach out to you privately as well. The question I have for now is, rates to West Coast are currently low. Are you seeing a lot of issues getting those containers to their final destination? Is the East Coast a better option even with higher rates?
Yeah, you should still go East Coast right now. It's just a lot of, so I'm assuming you're going to be kind of Midwest region. So I'm assuming that you generally speaking, ship into the West Coast and then take rail. And really our issue right now is rail. And it's not the potential of rail strike. It's just that the rail is not operating the way it needs to still. And then this rail strike is just some friction on top of that. So it's less about the port itself at this moment and more about the whole chain, or at least the chain after the port. So I'm sorry. I really wish I could tell you, just ship it to the West Coast right now because it's got some benefits. But to be safe, you really should be shipping through, if you can, go through your East Coast ports for right now. Just for a short period. Hopefully we can get some of this stuff figured out here in the next couple months, because that'd be very nice.
Exactly. It pays off, right? I do actually have another question. You mentioned an update on detention and demurrage. Do we have any updates?
So detention and demurrage, actually, I mentioned that as kind of a situation where we weren't able to get results that we wanted. There is an update. Let's do this. Vanessa, I'm going to I'm going to get you my source. I'll get you the little write-up. Share with Vanessa your email, and I'll send you what I was reading about it, and you can take a peek as well.
I have it. I can send everyone that on our recap email tomorrow morning.
That sounds perfect.
Okay. She said, thanks. Thank you, Christy. We have another question. Okay. Is there any discussion about removing the port congestion surcharges and fees?
It's such a tough time with all of these angles kind of getting attacked at once, right? Because we've been working on different components of, things that were viewed as issues, right? Before we had substantial congestion, and then also now the flattening of demand and all of the labor arguments and things like that. I have not been focused on that at the moment. So I have to dive back in. Gosh, I remember we did an episode on that.
We did an episode on the FMC proposing the new demurrage charges and detention, like the billing requirements that would be better for shippers. We don't have an update on that yet. It's still ongoing.
And that was like 6 to 8 months ago too. That was a while back. We need to get back on that one. Thank you. Great question. Great point. It's something we need to touch on. I'm going to make a note.
My uneducated guess is things will slowly go back to normal, just like the rates to the West Coast are. I don't think it will be, she said, I'm afraid it will be permanent here and there. I mean, I don't think it will be, I think it will be a long-term thing. Let's do what Jason's saying. We will get with our experts and get that information, and make sure you check my email for that is sent every Friday morning with a recap from the show. I send the link to the show, and then I'll send those 2 points, detention and demurrage, and then port congestion surcharges.
One of the things that's happening with port congestion surcharges, though, is there are, not your ports, but when you look at the rail, we are instigating new fines and fees at this moment. And that's kind of what makes me concerned that it's not going to be taken off anytime soon, because whenever like an area like that, right, is getting additions, you don't normally see subtractions in the subsequent areas. And that's the most annoying thing in the world for shippers in general, because then you just have more hoops you've got to jump through, and more of those seen fees that you have to get hit by, which is very frustrating. So honestly, great question. And yeah, it's always a pain point topic for us. So yeah.
No, don't worry. And you know what? I'll go actually a little bit beyond and make sure I send those answers to you two, Mary and Christy, privately as well. So everyone will get the information in the Friday email, but you two will receive a private email too, a personal email with the answers, with more details to your questions. Okay. Thank you, Jason. 10:29 for me, West Coast. So we made it on time.
1:29 and pouring snow over here. I love it. I'm yeah. If you guys don't know yet, Vanessa's Brazilian and she doesn't like anything below 85, and I don't love anything above 80. So we stay as far apart as possible in different climates.
We're good. We're good remote friends.
Yes.
We're probably never going to be happy at the same time. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, wherever you are. And I'll see you next week. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, guys.